What is your vision for India's AI in the next 5 years?
When we are traveling in a train, when we are traveling at a bus stop, at a rickshaw stand, no matter who is around us, is using AI in some form or the other. Right? We wanted to go through this discovery phase. We had this broad idea that AI can be used to solve problems of Bharat.
Hi everyone, I'm Prayank and I'm very excited to today sit down with Professor Mitesh. I finally caught hold of him. He's the AI man. So Professor Mitesh is a faculty at IIT Madras, Wadhwani School of AI, and he also heads the Nandan Nilekani AI4Bharat Center. So thank you, Professor Mitesh, for coming down and having a chat with us.
I'm
Right?
happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Professor Mitesh, let me start by asking you a few questions on your journey. What led you from industry to starting AI for Bharat?
So there are two parts to that journey, right? So the first part is moving from industry to academia, right? And then within academia, figuring out what needs to be done or what I want to do, and then that culminating in AI for Bharat, right? So what led me from industry to academia? Frankly, I was quite happy at IBM Research. It was a very good job. I was in good projects where there was a lot of research component to my work. But I have always been interested in teaching. Right? That was one attraction towards academia. And the other thing was that I also thought that I was at a point in my life, maybe at an age in my life, where I was looking for more freedom to do things that I want to do rather than being told what to do. And in any organization, right? I mean, nothing specific against IBM, right? But in any organization, at the end, you're driven by the goals of the company. There would be priorities, and rightly so, you're being paid to sort of drive those priorities, right? So you have to stick to those things. But I wanted to do something which is more where I decide what I want to do, what are the projects which are closer to my heart, and so on. And some of the things that I wanted to do, again, around Indian language technology, I thought I would be in a better position to do that in academia. So that combined with sort of my interest in teaching is what sort of pulled me to academia, and that's how I ended up in IIT Madras. Right. Within IIT Madras, of course, once you start in, there's a lot of uh, uh, initial energy required, right, to settle in the new place, right? And especially because the job nature is quite different. Now suddenly you have a student-facing role, right, where you have to teach.
Yeah.
And as I always tell people, right, uh, in IBM or in any organization earlier, I had maybe one deadline every 3 months or 4 months. When you're in academia and you're teaching, you have four deadlines every week because four lectures per week, right? And you can't miss that, right? So every, say, Tuesday, if I have a lecture at 9 a.m., I have to show up and I have to be prepared with the lecture, right? So that sort of requires an initial time to set in, right? And especially when you're teaching for the first time, it requires a lot of preparation, right? And my number has been that for a 1 hour course, you need at least 25 to 30 hours of preparation for a 1 hour lecture, right? But students nowadays are very smart, and you don't want to be caught up with questions which you have not thought through and then answer them on your feet, right? So I think that requires a lot of searching for the material, and of course, making the presentations, whatever. If you want to make notes or slides or even board work, that requires quite a bit of pressure, right? The first 2 years or so, I was like busy with doing all that, right? Settling in that and sort of keeping the research side going, getting in students, trying to get new students and all of that, right? And while this was happening, this was around 2016 is when I joined IIT Madras. And around 2000, I will first 2 years, 18 and so on. By that time, I mean, deep learning had reached a point where, at least from my vantage point, I could see that it is at a place where it's becoming useful in real applications, right? You can actually solve problems using deep learning. It was no longer an academic pursuit where you're publishing papers and so on. You can take something which is being published in a paper and build something useful to that. One of the most popular things around that time was YOLO, right? Interestingly, we talked about that. Yeah. So that had just come out, and you could do object detection with that and other things, right? And there's so many applications where that technology is useful, even today, right? Something like helmet detection, right? Whether a person is wearing helmet or not, right? Something to do with monitoring crops, right? Traffic monitoring, a lot of these things, right? So you could see that these things are already getting deployed in other places that we are hearing about. And this is not happening in India. This also happens to be around the time when Pratyush joined IIT Madras, right? And that was a big trigger point for me. And we both became partners in crime, right? And that journey has continued since then. So we used to think a lot about this, we talk a lot about this. How do we make AI useful for everyone, right? How do we use AI to solve the problems of Bharat, right? And that's how AI4Bharat was born, right?
So very interesting start point, and you found a partner in crime with you, right? But then when you were thinking about nobody's using AI in India, were there a specific use cases which really inspired you? Okay, we need to solve for this one use case first and start from there. And then I don't know how it works in IIT, like setting up a center specifically. So you need support from everyone else outside. Like what was the biggest initial hurdles to get this up? I don't know whether GPUs used to come in India at that time. So yeah.
A lot of these things, right? In fact, when we started off with a very different idea from where we are today, right? So as you asked, like, what was the specific use case that you had? When we started off, we did not have anything in mind. Right? We wanted to go through this discovery phase. We had this broad idea that AI can be used to solve problems of Bharat, right? But with specific problems to prioritize, how do you go about solving them? Whether we will solve it, whether we'll enable solving of these problems, that was not clear. Right? So in our initial days, when we launched AI for Bharat, we went through this discovery phase, right? And our initial idea was to have this as a hub and spokes model. Okay. So AI for Bharat is a hub. There are people who have problems which can be solved with AI, and there are people who can build AI solutions to solve these problems, right? Can we bring them together? That's again, let me give you an example of both, right? So people have problems who can solve with AI. So let's look at ISRO, right? They have a lot of satellite data. They want to do things like river thinning patterns and other things, right? Which you typically do with satellite data. They may or may not have the bandwidth and the talent to focus on building an AI solution, with a lot of other things happening there, right? Now, there's this whole community of students and wannabe AI professionals, right? So these are people who are there in our traditional IT industry, right, doing the traditional IT jobs, and now, given all the hype around AI, they had personal and professional aspirations to sort of switch to the AI shape, right? And they're willing to put in their time. Okay, I'll learn, I'll build something, it'll help my resume, and then maybe I can grow that way and so on. And of course, there's a large student community who are also in their third, fourth year, have already learned a bit of
So
basics,
are these
coding.
like open problems? Like everybody knows about them?
No, no. So we wanted to create it that way,
Okay.
right? So we thought we'll sort of get who are the people here, top 5, 6 people here, and who are some of the people that we can get here, right? And so we put an open call for participation for here, right? Can you volunteer? Do you want to volunteer at AI for Bharat? And this is what we want to do. We wrote a full vision document and so on, and we sort of publicized it, and we got a good response. A lot of people sort of came, and this side also many people came. We had a hospital, very sort of big hospital in Pondicherry, who came up with a very interesting problem, and I'll talk about that also. And I said about ISRO, there was something around digitization of old Sanskrit texts, right? All of these very India-centric problems, right? In fact, I should talk about the problem that the hospital came to us with, right? So in India, apparently these ECG machines, they're available even in remote areas. Okay. And there's a compounder who can take the ECG. But of course, he doesn't know what to do once the report comes. So he can take the printout, he'll connect and take the printout, but he doesn't know what to do with it, right? Now, what I was told by the doctor, and I may be medically wrong, but I just remember from memory whatever I remember, right? There are like 4 to 5 different sort of patterns that you can see in the ECG, which might indicate a heart attack. Okay, right? And again, talking from memory, so some stats may be wrong, is that if someone detects that there was a possible heart attack here, then you can be given a tablet within the first 4 hours, right? Which could then keep you alive for a while till you reach the city hospital or something, right? So you could do some like initial intervention to then sort of set up for the prolonged treatment and all that. But now, if you're reading and you don't know, and you say, okay, take this ECG, go to the city hospital and find out, by that time it would be too late, right? So now imagine if you had an app which could just take this photo and just has to do a simple classification. Yes, problem, no problem, right? Is it a heart attack, not? A very India specific problem, right? Because we have the device, but we don't have the expert, right? So these kind of problems, and this looks like a solvable problem. Even with the technology at that time, this looked like a solvable
By
problem.
the way, very interesting problem because we invested some time ago in a long time ago in a company called Sictuple, and they were solving this problem of reading uh, slides in a pathology lab. And we thought the same thing, that you have a compounder who can make it, but he can't really report on it. And the funny thing is, this innovation you're saying is for India. A bunch of investors came and met the company and they said, "Oh, we need this in the US." Like, what are you talking? Like, it's so expensive in the US that your solution will like bring down the cost by 1/10 or 150 or some craziness. So my mind was like, "Oh, we were building this for India, but it is applicable everywhere."
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a very interesting use
Yeah,
case,
so
right?
that's how it was, right? So you found a bunch of these people with problems and many people who volunteer, right? And then you said, okay, we are set. Let's sort of try to do a matching of people, and we come up with the AI guidance. Okay, so if this guy asks whether I should use YOLO or faster RCNN or something, no, maybe this is better. This is library you should try. If it's a on device, maybe this will be faster and things like that, right? And this is the amount of data you will need, and these are the steps you
So
should.
this is very interesting because like 2 days ago I was showing you the app which you point with the camera and say I want Kannada word for this, and I did not know YOLO use karna hai, some other model use karna hai, and I was like, well, this is very hard, like, and I don't know computer vision, so I was like, why does this library only give me 80 categories and not just know what this is, right? So I did not know there's this concept of category and then fine tuning it and all that, and obviously I was vibe coding, but very interesting. Yeah, so basically what your point is that you could give technical guidance to somebody who's probably not very deep in AI and pick out and choose, okay, this is how the right direction go and search,
Right,
right?
right,
So
right.
yeah, that's important.
Yeah. So that's how we started, and right then we started having these marathon meetings on weekends, right? Where we used to have like these group-wise meetings. The people who have been identified for the ECG problem, the people identified for the satellite image and all that, right? And then what happened over the course of time is life took over. So what happens is that many of these people who signed up initially, they had their day lives, right? I mean, they're either working already in the industry or they were students and so on. And some of them were also be like, as I would say, right? They wanted to learn, but they were not at a level where they could start contributing, right? And this was not an effort where we could bring people up, right, to that level, right? I mean, we do other things to do that, but this was where you're sort of ready at a stage and we can sort of build something
Where
together.
the person who's giving the problem wants
One
solution.
solution, right?
Yeah. So
So here the problem was people started dropping off in the weekend calls because I have a deadline today, I have some academic commitment, boss is here and so on. On this side, what happened is that as we started getting deeper into the problems, we said, boss, if you want to solve this, this is the amount of data I would require, right? Are you willing to share existing data? Often no. Are you willing to sort of invest not necessarily money, but resources in creating this data, right? So, example, can you have interns in your organization who could label some data for us, right? And all of this was not panning out, right? So, it didn't like fly well with people. Again, the moment they think that, okay, I have to put in something, even if it's not necessarily money, but effort, people started backing out. And this conversation slowed down, so on, right? And then we realized that and I give examples of a few problems, but there are many things that we tried at that time, right? And one underlying thing which started emerging is that language issues are ubiquitous, right? I mean, language technology being required in multiple places, right? Everyone has something which is in one language, I want in another language, I want voice for something and so on. So then we sort of, after 6, 9 months, we stepped back and said, boss, this is not working. We're not being able to do anything
yeah,
of
point
purpose.
solutions for everybody is not
No,
happening.
we are not being able to do anything of purpose, right? I mean, we have found out a lot of interesting problems. When we talk to people, it sounds very cool. And there's also a time when we were not funded. So we are just doing things on our own and so on. We're just like two faculty and a bunch of students who are doing something together. Right? So we could also not say, okay, if you cannot bring the data, okay, we will invest and we'll help you annotate. You just sort of bring in the domain, right? And we'll do that. So we are not in a position to do that. So then we stepped back and said, okay, everything looks like if we focus on one problem instead of trying to solve everything from vision to language, right, and speech and all of this, let's focus on one thing that we know. And I have both of us had like background in sort of language technology, right? And so we said, okay, let's focus on language technology because then We can do it ourselves. We don't need to rely on these volunteers who may or may not turn up, right? And then we know what the challenging problems there are. So we don't need these people to tell us what the problems are, right? And we know that translation is a problem. We know that natural language understanding, which now has become obsolete because LLMs do all of it and so on, was a big problem at that time, right? People at that time were also invested in conversational agents, which looked very different from what we are. I mean, there were like hardly any successful stories over there at that time. But we knew all of these are problems, right? So let's focus on them. Things like Indian keyboards, right? I mean, romanization for Indian languages and things like that. So we said that there's value in creating this foundational layer of language technology for Indian languages. And then we go and build that, okay, and we put it out in the open so that then these people can come together and build it without us being in the scene. Right? We've put it out in the open. Now you don't have to build a translation.
You were trying to do matching, but now you can say, we know how to build it.
Yeah.
We know the problems. We will solve for it.
Yeah.
And then put that. It's a great solution, right? Like now, anybody who's interested to put in the effort from both sides, they can come together.
They come together and do it, right? And
Yeah.
then people can build on top of it. And we are very clear that
And that philosophy continues even now.
Continues even now, right? So that is how the final avatar of sort of AI for Bharat came into place. We focus on language technology, all 22 languages, all verticals within it, right? At that time, it was mainly text, but we soon pivoted to speech and now to document understanding like vision.
This is
And
like a journey of a startup founder. You're trying to find PMF. You have like, okay, which business model will work, and then you're coming to that answer by like spending time 6-9 months and then coming to this, right? So it's pretty cool. So then my question to you is, uh, how does a Indian startup today, and like when we talk to startups in speech and everything else, like voice agents for customer care, they typically tend to use like US models like 11 Labs and DeepGram, Accel is invested in Assembly AI, right? So why are they not using AI for Bharat models? Like what can they do to use AI for Bharat models?
so I think one thing which is required, right, is that see many of the solution builders today, right, they are more interested in the solution and not in sort of excelling in the underlying AI technology, right? So I don't want to dirty my hands with AI. You have an AI piece. I just want to plug it into my solution. And
I want to call an API.
call an API, right? So now we have a lot of API integrators in India. And I think the companies that you named and some others also, right, they have done a very good job of having these APIs built. What we thought is that building an open ecosystem is more important. So we'll put out the weights, we'll put out some education around that and so on. And then the community will grow and build it on top of it, right? But I guess right now, when there is a rush to grab all the low hanging fruits out there, right, before you can get deeper, I think these API based solutions have an edge, right? Because now you're giving me an API. And mind you, some of the names that you took, they do have good models, right? Yes, not that we have compared across some of these and we find that our models are better in some of the cases, right? And I'm sure there are some cases where they're not better, right? It's not like Hamesha we are better or they're not we, right? What I believe is that we can clearly compete with them in accuracy and performance. I have no doubt about it, right? Our models can compete with that. But what we are not able to do is provide these hosted solutions, right? Because there's a cost involved, right? So we can build the foundational technology, right? So our thinking was this, that there is a lot of entry barrier for someone today who has an AI based idea to say that first I'll build the AI stack and then put the solution. We'll build the AI stack. You take that and then build the solution, focus on that. So our goal was to reduce this entry barrier. Now, if you want the solution part and you have to hit our API, we cannot bear that cost, right? I mean, any academic
No,
institute.
fair. But I think you bring a very important point that yes, the people are built on these API models which are available from closed source. Today, it's important that you go to market fast, but maybe in another 3-4 years, when everybody has access to same APIs, everybody's done the engineering, then the deltas will start coming when you have deeper knowledge of AI and you can fine tune your use cases. So one of the use cases which you're talking about, how people say money versus Aadhaar card, right? So maybe if you can take that example.
Yeah. So I'll just continue a bit more on that point, right? And the other thing has been that our journey has been this about building this painful ramp to get to where we are. What do we mean, right? So when we started AI for Bharat, it is like a no-brainer that, I mean, the question is we want to build for 22 languages. Then the obvious question is why does it not exist today? Why am I the first person to come up with it? It's like an obvious idea, right? There's nothing great in saying that I'm going to build technology for 22 languages. And the simple answer is data. There's not enough data. right? And you would have heard this term democratization of AI a lot. It was a fad in around 2018. It still is, right? And what people don't realize is that AI, there are three components to it. One is data, the other is the model, and the third is the compute. Of course, and underlying all of this, there's talent also. Yeah. But let's talk about data, compute, and model, right? So when the word democratization was being used, what was democratized? The model, right? Now it's like giving a gun without the data, right? I don't have the data, right? So what do I do with the model, right? Of course, I'm very grateful because we build on all these democratized platforms, right? I mean, PyTorch and all of this is superb work, and I really appreciate it. I'm just saying that the problem was not solved, right? If I have the algorithm to build a translation model, but I don't have the data for that, right? So we had to create this data for Indian languages, right? And a lot of our effort in the past 3 years has been to build this foundational infrastructure for Indian languages, right? Now, some of the early players, they had the liberty of either buying this data because I mean, they are of course not going to open source it, right? So since we have to open source it, we have to build it with certain principles so that no long-term usage problems and so on, right? So when you acquire data, you can get that easy, quick 1,000 hours in a day. Yeah. For me, it takes 3 years to collect 1,000 hours and so on, right? So I think now we are closing those data gaps, right? And we're also keeping up to date with the technological advancements. Now everything has become more or less LLM based, right? And I can go into a technical discussion on that, but I'll not. But a lot of the
No, we
modern
can talk
stuff.
technical, right? So let's do it. So, but because you also mentioned in one of the interviews you gave that now the technology you guys have created in AI4Bharat is producing more data by itself. So you will be able to close the gap very quickly, right? Can you explain that a
Yeah,
little
I'm
bit?
glad that someone listens to what I say and remembers it. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, good. So now, again, pardon if I'm sort of getting a bit too long, windy and so on, but let's see, in the past 3 years, 4 years, we as the AI ecosystem, not just us, but India, right? We've been trying to catch up with what has happened in the West, right? Yeah. Come to a point where our models are as good as what the West was. But of course, in the meantime, they've also moved ahead, right? And these movements are much faster because every generation is moving faster, right? So now we have come to, if we took 4 years to, again, just putting some numbers which are a bit hand wavy, but just to make a point, right? If we took 4 years to cover a gap which was at least 1.5 decade, right? In terms of how behind we were in technology 4 years back, we've sort of been able to cover that gap, right? Now in 4 years, another half a decade roughly has gone by. Are we going to take so much more time to catch up with it? And the answer is no, because now with our models and with the way the technology has evolved, right? And that's where the democratization of the model comes in. We are now able to reach a point, which I'm calling the snowball effect. With all the data that we have collected, we are now being able to build models which can generate more data, right? And so one example of that is the following, right? Today, if you want to fine tune for a specific domain, okay, my care is that financial transactions to go through, then I only know that the people who are going to use my app are going to talk about इतना पैसा ट्रांसफर कर दो, मेरा अकाउंट नंबर ये है, कल एफडी अप्लाई किया था, हुआ कि नहीं हुआ, बैलेंस क्या है, इंटरेस्ट, so limited vocabulary, right? And I want it to work on these kind of conversations. Today, LLMs have reached a point where I can give it a two-line prompt and say that this is my application. Can you generate like 1,000 conversations which are really coming from that domain? Right? Okay. I'll generate text conversations. Right. Speech synthesis has reached a point where I can say this is a rural woman in a certain part of India. This is how her voice is. This is a 4-second clip. Can you synthesize this conversation in her voice?
Oh, wow.
Right.
Okay.
Earlier, I was going to the ground and collecting this
So
data
you're saying you're able to get training data out of
out of small amounts
small
of
sample.
data,
Okay.
right? So that's what we need to do. Still, this process is being perfected, whereby I see that it will be perfected, right? We'll have to do that, right? So today morning only we're talking about it, and currently the gap that we see when we train on fully synthetic data versus real data is around 10 points in performance on certain benchmarks. Again, these numbers across benchmarks may vary and so on, but this is encouraging for me, right? Because I know that if I perfect this process, I can soon reach a point where my synthetic data starts looking as close to real data, right? And I can generate data in abundance, right? So those cycles are yet to happen for the open source ecosystem.
So, Mitesh, one question which is top of mind, like why is building for AI for India different from what for the West? Aren't these all just languages, same thing, same models, everything? So,
Yeah. So I'll probably explain that to so few examples, right? So when ChatGPT came out, it just had a text interface, November 22 when it came out, right? and I'm sure close to a million Indians were happily interacting with typing on their keyboards and so on, right? Now, how many of us can actually type in our languages on the keyboard, right? First of all, keyboards are not very sort of built for supporting Indian languages. They are like sort of hacks to use it, but it's not very convenient, right? And you have to use a lot of, you have to learn it basically, and one wants to do that, right? And even if we do, we would want to type what is known as romanized. Yes. Right? And your romanized would be very different from mine. You would say ghar as GHAR, I might say GHR. I think samajh jayenge, GHR is okay. And that's what we do when we're doing on WhatsApp, right? So this is not something that is seen in the West, right? It's like, of course, there's SMS lingo and things like that. But then all of that is also now standards, right? And these are what it is, right? So now for India, anything to work, you have to first handle the input problem, right? What is the input going to be? And the most natural interface in India is voice.
Voice.
Right?
Yeah, diversity so much.
Yeah. And voice, why is it? Because either we all are good at talking, listening in our languages, not good at reading and writing them. That's the unfortunate truth, right? And you give me a paragraph on the Battle of Panipat in Hindi, no matter how much interested I am in history, I'll struggle to sort of, I would be much rather prefer in English. And this is about me, maybe because I'm educated in English. But then there's also a section of people who can't read, right? And the literacy levels are also what they are and so on. So voice is, of course, the most natural medium, right? And now when we come to voice, it's not one language. It's not even 22 languages. It's not even 100 languages, right? So it's languages and their dialects, and then you throw in accents and so on, right? So it's very hard to sort of make it work for everything. Of course, one may argue that same holds for English because there's the American English, there's the British English, then there's people in Europe who says,
But our scripts are
and
different.
yeah, so
Like everything
quite
is
a bit of a challenge.
yeah.
And in a very concentrated geography, like a very large amount of diversity, right? So I think that's very different in India. How do you handle that, right? The other is, of course, our way of using technology, right? I mean, how would we interact with it is very different from how things would be in the West, right? What are the things that we care about, right? This is my personal opinion, and of course, you're going to quote me on it, or this will be in the video. But I think when I don't know whether I'll get into trouble for saying this, but so I think when DeepSeek came out and all, right, there was a lot of hangama around it, sort of being extremely good on math and reasoning on that, right? My personal view is that we don't necessarily need to chase the math and reasoning part, right? We don't want our models to clear JEE. We are like lakhs of students writing JEE, would rather they clear it, right? And so on. And we have many other problems which are more grounded in sort of basic education, language learning, and things like that, right? And we should maybe focus on those. Can our models be more language aware, right? And aware of the culture of India and so on, right? So now this also focus, I mean, where do you want to really focus? I'm not saying that the verdict is not, I'm not saying that I'm not passing a judgment that we should not focus on math, right? But maybe you should think back and sort of sit back and think about what are the main things that we want to focus
Actually,
on.
it's a very interesting. I have one question also, which is, what is it that mainstream AI is focusing on, and you think that's what you're alluding to? We have people are solving some problems, but there should be other problems which need to be solved. So, can you take some examples of that?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of that is around language and sort of voice and speech, right? I mean, how do we make, so if sort of in an Indian context, right? If you want a voice application to work end to end, right? You have to be sure that the person is going to be talking in code mixing, right? And they would also prefer to be talked back in code mixing, right?
So, English, for
English.
example,
My
right?
favorite example here is that someone told us that हम आपका इंडिक ट्रांस मॉडल यूज़ कर रहे हैं और हमारा प्रॉब्लम ये है कि वो बहुत शुद्ध ट्रांसलेशन दे रहा है लाइक आई मीन आई शुड बी हैप्पी अबाउट इट सैड अबाउट इट and the problem was this that they were using it in a rack setup, right, where a user has come in asking about his eligibility for something, right, or some question about exam hall or something. So the question is in Hindi, does a translation, the LLM does reasoning on a manual or a document about exam hall mein kya karna hai, and then it gets the answer as you need to show your I card in the exam. And then it translates it back to Hindi and shows, and it says that परीक्षा केंद्र में आपके पहचान पत्र की जांच की जाएगी, right? In India, no one understands this.
पहचान
Yeah,
पत्र.
exam hall में आपका ID card check किया जाएगा, right?
Yes.
जांच की जाएगी and all that, and no one
Correct.
understands, right?
Correct.
So they wanted this like
Right.
colloquial translations, right? And in many of our languages, right, Tamil is a classic example of this, is that the spoken form is very different from the written form, right? And I'm not even talking about dialects or anything here. I'm just saying that someone who has grown up in Chennai
So
learned.
one question there,
Yeah.
then. Sorry to interrupt you, but like, how, I understand the use case and the problem.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think Chat GPT can solve for it, right? So, how does a startup think about if they want to solve this problem? Colloquial conversation is a very important thing. In English, I don't think it matters. There is discussion on Gen Z slang and all that, but let's say this problem, like the real day, like how does a startup think about solving this problem technically, whether using something from AI for Bharat or
Right,
outside of AI
right.
for Bharat? So,
I think so. Now, this how to think about this is sort of also evolving, right? 3 to 4 years back, if you had asked me, right, I think there was a lot of grunt work required. That means if there's a specific demographic that you care about, you'll have to go and collect data from that demographic. Right? It's a specific Madurai accent, Madurai dialect that you want, and that's your target customer base. Then you'll have to go and collect data there, right? Now, with the help of LLMs, I think we're able to sort of automate certain parts of this, right? With a few examples, we can say that this is how standard Tamil differs from this. That with very powerful LLMs, proprietary LLMs, for the top 3 to 4 Indian languages, right? Not for the long chain of languages, right? But I'm saying that this will also evolve. Like 4 years back, this was zero. Now at least 4 or 5 languages, and as time goes by, this will evolve, right? So now with a mix of sort of LLM-based synthetic data generation with a wrapper of human validation on top of that is how we can solve these problems, right? And some places where we'll get lucky, just the automated pipeline will also be able to start it.
and if the startup, let's say, starts doing that, can they come to AI for Bharat and say, hey, we are doing this, let's say using Chat GPT, some of your model, that model. Can Is there a way for AI for Bharat to co-work with them, co-solve the solution? Like, how should a startup approach you? What would be your expectation of them? How can they benefit?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So I think we have always struggled to make this work, right? Because we are always we're an academic institute at the end of the day, right? And always sort of short of human resources in terms of tech talent which is there, and also to be frank, right? A lot of the tech talent that we have, they are on their academic journeys. Right? So there are other master students, PhD students, and so on, and they have their own goals in life. Right? They have to publish papers to finish their degrees. That's what their immediate goal is, right? And sort of doing sort of engineering work to help a startup. It's not that they're not capable of it. They
yeah,
can
yeah.
do it, but it's not in their
A
path.
startup might come with a view, ki, hey, are you my consultant?
Yeah.
But they are not the consultant. They are researchers who are solving their problems. And if there is a serendipity that your problem and their problem intersect, then it'll be good.
Yeah, and that often doesn't happen. It was always something special that they need, which sort of causes this impedance mismatch, right? So what we need, and I think that's some of the conversation that we started earlier before recording, right, was that if I think we need to have someone help us in sort of preparing some amount of usage guidelines around these things. That this is a model, this is exactly what it can do.
Yeah.
This is what you should not use it for. This is how you should use it for. These are some use cases where people have tried it. These are the challenges. This is how they solved it, and so on.
We were discussing that we need maybe volunteers or people who are interested in AI to work with AI for Bharat to create like tutorials, developer evangelism. This is how you use it. This is how it works in the pipeline for voice. Right. I think we should be able to find people I hope viewers who are watching this podcast can contribute to that.
Yeah, so this developer evangelism is the right phrase. I mean, that's something that we have almost never been able to do, right? We do work with closely with Bhashini, with Ekstep Foundation, and other partners, right? And there our relationships are there's good match in what we want to do, right? And those sort of engagements go well, right?
Right.
But just like doing it at scale is something that we have not been able to do, right?
Yeah, no, I think there should be smart founders who, let's say, we were just discussing, and I was wondering that can all the models from FO be put on Olama, for example, so anybody can run their models inside their laptop. They don't have to think of going to AWS and deploying it. I'm sure somebody will figure it out, and we'll, I think, both be able to happy to support those efforts. So yeah, but I think that is needed. So, Professor Mitesh, I went to the website, and you have a very large set of tools available on the website. And I was kind of lost. So, for me and for our listeners, can you help us understand like what are the different things which you have, and what is the use case when they should look at something?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I'll talk about the top things which I think
yeah,
are useful, right, and that
yes,
they should look at, right? So one, of course, is the translation model,
yeah,
right? Now, what happens is I think that I'll just address the confusion that arises, right? So now within translation itself, we have 2 to 3 different streams. So one is on the data side. We've done a lot of work on sort of curating large scale data sets, both human curated, automatically curated, and so on, right? And there has been like uh, regular milestones there. So we release something in 2021, then to 22, 23, and we keep track of all of this on our website. There's a timeline that we show, right? And then I guess that causes confusion that which one should I use? Is one a superset of the other, subset of the other? And this information is available, but I can believe that someone just looking at it will get sort of confused, right? So that's one point of confusion. And I think one way to look at it is just look at the latest one, right? So you see 2025 as the top in the timeline, just take that and you will be done, right? The other stream there is the models. Again, models we have regularly released trans 1, trans 2, trans 3 beta, and so on, right? And we're going to release something soon in partnership with Sarvam. So this translation model is very useful, right? And now in our next generation of model, we are addressing long form translation. So you can give entire articles and it can
So
translate.
this is text translation from,
Like
let's say, some language to Indic languages.
Indic language, English to Indic language, and Indic language to English. We'll soon have an Indic to Indic also, but right now the focus is on English to X and X to English, right? So this is one useful model that is everyone should know about. The other is speech recognition. Again, the same story there. Multiple milestones of data sets that we have released and multiple milestones of models that we have released. Just look at the latest one. We always make sure that it's a superset of.
What's the name for that one?
It's Indic Conformer or Indic ASR, either of them. And so that is used for transcribing spoken content. So the input there is an audio file, and the transcript is sort of a verbatim transcript of what is being said, right? With maybe minor corrections, like if I say mujhe, then maybe one of the mujhes would be cancelled out, right? So some mistakes, but more or less it's a verbatim transcription. And if you're using in downstream applications, as I was telling you earlier, you might have to build some sort of a normalization on top of it, right? For example, if I say that 5 2 3 4 रुपए मेरे अकाउंट से ट्रांसफर कर दे, then it will transcribe 5 2 3 4 accurately, right? But what you want in your application is perhaps 5234, right? So that normalization of converting 5 2 3 4 is required, right? So that is not a part of, I mean, the ASR technology. It's a layer that you add on top, right? And that often leads to confusion. The other is text to speech, TTS, speech synthesis, where you can give in a text and then you can choose from a set of voices and ask it to synthesize in that voice, right? So here again, there are data sets that we have released over the years, and then there's a set of models that we have released. As of now, I think our model supports 16 languages, and we'll get to 22 soon, right? For ASR and translation, we are already at 22 languages, right?
So I have one question. Compared to the available, more popular commercial models in the world, like GPT Voice or again 11 Labs, and like, do we have a delta which they don't have?
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah. So I'm very confident for ASR. Our models are at par or better than anything available out there, right? Uh, Modulo may be the latest deep tech models, right? Maybe Gemini or others, right? Modulo that. But again, I think in
but
language
they're also very
coverage,
expensive to use.
yeah,
So
language coverage, we would be better. Okay, I mean, average across languages and so on, right? So ASR, I think people should definitely use. I'm very confident about that. Again, within the next 2-3 weeks, we are releasing a next version, which we are very hopeful about, and that people should use, right? For speech synthesis, we are soon getting there, right? Ideally, one of the primary differences, right, is that the speech synthesis quality largely boils down to the voice actor's quality, right? So the way speech synthesis works is that you record a certain number of hours of data, typically not more than 100, right? And with modern, even lesser, right? But say 100 hours. And you hire a top voice artist, right? And now, no matter what I do, if you have hired Amitabh Bachchan as your voice artist, right, your model is going to win,
okay,
right? Because that voice itself sort of is
okay,
what it is, right?
yeah. So speech is when you say something and model says it, and
Yeah, the
the
model
quality
has
of the voice
synthesized it,
is
right?
so nice. So
Quality of the voice, right? And there we have certain constraints in how much we can spend and sort of, I can't hire a Bollywood artist, right? So that's a gap, but we are addressing that now, right? And we'll sort of soon have voices which are better, right? But again, I'm not saying that it's bad. It's quite comparable.
But tell me one thing, let's quantify this. So for 100 hours of recording by a good sounding voice, how much does that cost?
It is a big spectrum. It could cost. See, again, there are multiple costs here, right? One is your recording one-time cost. Right? The other is the lifelong license, which again, there's a lot of awareness today, thankfully, and these are not no longer lifelong licenses.
Where I'm going is if a startup can invest that money.
I would say, okay, let's see. The recording cost itself, maybe some artists would go as much as 50,000 to 1 lakh per hour. Okay, right?
So
So
that's 1
100,
crore worth of
1 lakh.
recording. Yeah.
But then the bigger problem is the licensing, right? At this cost, I have recorded. Now I'm giving you a 2-year license. After that, we'll have to renew it, or you'll have to hire a new artist and so on, right?
But why can't I just use my son's voice? Let's say who's if it's good, I can just use that.
I think there is a certain quality of
Quality of
voice required,
the
right?
way
And we
you
have
speak.
seen that
Okay.
that is the main difference, right? People are even able to ignore pronunciation errors if the voice
Oh,
is very good.
yeah,
Right?
awesome.
And that's what,
Okay.
yeah, you would know about the controversy around OpenAI,
Yeah.
from whatever happened is. Right? So there's a reason why they wanted such voices.
Okay. My last question to you. So, what is your vision for India's AI in the next 5 years? Like, how do you think it should shape up?
Yeah. So I'm going to sort of steal a bit from Mr. Nandan Nilekani here, right? And so we are having a conversation with him, and his statement was this, right? That today, if anyone has to tell me whether UPI is successful or not, right, I don't need anyone to tell me. I just walk out of my house. I can see that sabji wala there who has that tag, and he's accepting payment on UPI, right? So this ubiquitous, pervasive usage of sort of that technology is what is success, right? And the same thing needs to happen for India, right? When we are traveling in a train, when we are traveling at a bus stop, at a rickshaw stand, no matter who is around us, is using AI in some form or the other, right? Be it a child in a rural school in the remotest part of India, right? Or someone sitting in a corporate office or anywhere in between, right? And no matter what sort of journey you have, or what sort of specific event of your life you are in, right? I mean, it is being used, right? And that's what success would be, right? This pervasive usage. And that for that to happen, I think we really have to be mindful of the cost at which we do it, right? So the inference costs have to come down much lower. And that will happen by a combination of technological advancements as well as hopefully GPU costs going down, alternative solutions coming in and things like that, right? And that's how usage will increase, right? And it should become like a no-brainer for everyone to use AI as a basic assistant for everything that you do in life, right? So that's what success.
No, I think that's a great way to end this podcast. Thank you for you being here. And I think one of the things which you mentioned was like, how does all the founders who are listening to this make, uh, like he's saying, AI part of our lives on a day-to-day basis? Everybody is using it. I think that's the ask. So thank you, Professor Mitesh, for his. Yeah, no, it was great. And I hope my call to action for all the listeners is please contribute to AI for Bharat. We can definitely show a lot of developer love here. So very excited to have you here. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kelly. You.